I'm Adam Pasquarella, and welcome to The Power of Bold. Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in to The Power of Bold. This is our 16th episode, and I'm stoked to share my conversation with G. Richard Schell, a professor of legal studies and business ethics and management at the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania. I first met Professor Schell in April 2014. At the time, I was a 3L at Penn Law School, and I was wrapping up my studies before moving to New York. Penn allowed law students to take courses at other schools within the university, including the Wharton School, which is Penn's famous business school. I was able to take a semester-long course at Wharton, where professors held lectures on topics in finance and management. While it was all great, one of my favorite lectures was from Professor Schell, who teaches Wharton's well-renowned Success course. Professor Schell spoke to a room full of law students on topics like success, happiness, and how we can find meaningful work. And on the way out, he gave us copies of his book titled Springboard, Launching Your Personal Search for Success. It's honestly one of the best books that I've read on the topic of success and how we achieve it. With all of that said, I was really excited to have Professor Schell on the podcast. In our conversation, we speak about a variety of topics, including Professor Schell's interesting path to the Wharton School, how we can overcome the internal fears that hold us back from taking a risk, how our family, society, and social media influence our definition of success, and how the rise of artificial intelligence and other technological innovations will affect our ideas of success and meaningful work. So ultimately, I hope you enjoy our free-flowing conversation. Let's get to the interview. I'm speaking with G. Richard Schell, a professor of legal studies and business ethics and management at the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania. He's also the chairperson of the Legal Studies and Business Ethics Department at Wharton. At UPenn, he has taught several courses, including Wharton's popular Success course, and he has received awards for teaching, including an MBA Excellence in Teaching Award in 2017. He's the author of several books, including Springboard, Launching Your Personal Search for Success, which is primarily what we're going to discuss today. Now, out of full disclosure, several years ago, I took a course at Wharton, where I heard Professor Schell speak for one class. To put it simply, it was one of the best lectures I've heard in a long time. So Professor Schell, many thanks for appearing on the podcast.
Yeah, my pleasure, Adam. Thanks for having me.
Of course, you have so many great insights about careers, happiness, and success in your book, Springboard, and we're going to spend a lot of time diving into those lessons that we can learn from the book. But before that, I'd first like to dig into your really fascinating story, from your youth to when you became a professor at one of the best business schools in the world. Now, in Springboard, you describe your trials and tribulations, and it reminded me of this meme on the internet, where there's a chart that says what success seems like, and it shows a straight line up and to the right. But then the image next to it, which is another chart, says what success is really like, and it shows a scrambled line going all over the place, but eventually it goes up and to the right. So I thought that was pretty interesting, and I'd like to start at the beginning of the book. So can you really tell our listeners about your childhood life, and specifically I'm thinking what you wanted to be when you grew up?
Oh, sure. So my father was a general in the Marine Corps, and his father was an officer in the Army, and my mother's father was an officer in the Navy, and my sister had married a naval officer. I was born after World War II, and both my sisters were born before World War II, so I was sort of the third child, the only son, and sort of a post-war baby boom. I mean, the word boomers literally is true in my case, because my dad had been wounded in the Pacific on Saipan, and had spent a couple of years in a hospital in San Diego, and then when he finally got out of the hospital, I appeared. So the expectation of my family was really clear from the very beginning that I would be going into the family line of work, which was the military. And really the only big choice that lay in front of me was whether I would go to West Point or Annapolis, the Naval Academy. I did have a third choice because my dad had gone to the Virginia Military Institute, and actually by the time I went to college, he was the head of the Virginia Military Institute. He was president of it. So I had these military schools laid out in front of me. I did manage to get a compromise in high school. When I applied to college, my parents agreed that I could go to, as long as I was on a Navy scholarship, which is available, and you can go to any school that has a Navy ROTC program, then I could do that. So, as fate would have it, I got a Navy ROTC scholarship, and I got to go somewhere besides a military academy. But still, everything was going according to plan. Then, in the middle of my junior year in college, it was the Vietnam War era, and my vocation as a military officer suddenly was thrown into doubt because the escalation of the war, the invasion of Cambodia, the explosion across the country of different protest movements about the war, and the culture really shifted very, very dramatically and very rapidly. And from my point of view, I was just called to ask myself what I was actually signing up to do as a military officer, and hadn't really processed what it meant in that specific occasion. And what it meant, as I thought about it, was that I was going to be going to Vietnam to kill people that I didn't have any real quarrel with, and that no one could satisfactorily explain why we were there doing that. So it was pretty cataclysmic identity crisis for me. But in the end, with the help of the chaplain at the university where I was going, and the Quakers who were counseling people at the time, I ended up deciding to become a pacifist and to resign my military scholarship and to become a war resister. So, this was a pretty hard thing to do on a dime at the time, and I think I didn't really know it at the time, but it really threw me into a very significant identity crisis and kind of a depression that when you cut off your past like that, all of my family's values and everything, you really have a hard time imagining what the future is going to look like, and I was stuck there. I finished college, and I got my conscientious objector status for the draft and went to work in the ghettos in Washington, D.C., helping families in condemned buildings, trying to find some other place to live. But it was still, that even sort of caused my identity crisis to get even worse because I've been in a pretty bucolic campus, and then all of a sudden, in addition to not really relating to my family anymore, I was thrust into the very worst part of the American poverty experience, and so I was crashing pretty hard. And eventually, I just couldn't process it. So I took my meager savings, packed my bags, got a one-way ticket to Greece, and left the country with the goal, really, just to try to see if I could sort myself out. And I wasn't going to come home until I did. So it was a quest. It wasn't a trip. It was a quest.
Right. You call them your Odyssey years, right? The Odyssey years.
Yeah. I mean, actually, David Brooks has written a book that recently that sort of identifies this period of time for people nowadays in the modern culture between roughly college and marriage, sort of your 20s, where people really do go on an odyssey. I mean, it takes different forms. I certainly had no idea I was doing it at the time. I had no choice. I was sitting in my room in Washington watching dust motes go through, sunbeams. I was barely able to get up in the morning, but I think people with more functionality than that still seek some sort of period of their lives when they can kind of ask the big questions about who they are and what they think they ought to do, and experiment a little and travel or take jobs that might not be their final career, but still are looking to see what insights they can find about themselves. And that was, I mean, in my case, that was exactly what I was doing, but I was doing it with a lot more urgency that I had no idea what the answers were and no idea what I would do if I couldn't find them. So it was kind of a desperate quest. But anyway, I ended up, in those days you could get a bus going all the way from Istanbul to New Delhi for $30, and it was called the Magic Bus, and it was the hippie bus sort of. It left every day from Istanbul, so you could get off anywhere you wanted, and the roads were still open all the way through Iran and Afghanistan, and just pick up the bus any day you want to get back on it. It was just a way to get across Asia. So I bought a ticket on that and headed east. Ended up getting some adventures that are related in the book. But the principal thing was I figured out that the real quest was to be looking inside, and
right.
I found opportunities to stay at monasteries, Buddhist monasteries in Sri Lanka and in South Korea, and spent months, on that inner quest under some wonderful teachers, and ultimately was able to sort of figure out that it was time for me to go home and reconcile with my family, and I did. I moved into the basement of my family's home in Lexington, Virginia, and ended up selling insulation door to door, and still no idea what I wanted to do, but I did have a much clearer idea on who I was, and I think the meditation really helped to anchor me. And then from there, I just ended up going. It was really a talent assessment. I'm terrible at math. I got a 500 on my math college SATs, but I'm pretty good at words, and so I sorted that I could go to law school, as you did, with some verbal ability, and got into the University of Virginia, which was where I was living, and then began trying to figure out how I could make a living. It was at UVA, though, that I kind of really got my vocation, because there was this moment in my first year in law school where I was sitting in a contracts class and riveted by a wonderful teacher who was driving us through various iterations of a case, and I recognized suddenly that with all the energy in that room, that the one thing I really wanted to do was not be a lawyer at all, but to be the guy in the front of the room teaching. And so after that, everything I did was really just, how do I get to be a teacher? I had thought I wanted to be a teacher of Shakespeare back before I took off on this trip, and my brother-in-law was a professor of Shakespeare at UVA, and he told me, don't even think about it, there are no jobs. And so the law was the next thing up for words. So, I did what you have to do to try to get a teaching job in those days in law, which was clerk and write articles and stuff like that. So, fortune smiled on me, and I had some job offers at law schools, but also at the Wharton School. Surprisingly, I'd never heard of the Wharton School until I mentioned that I'd been called by the Wharton School for a job interview to my wife, whose brother had gone to Wharton. So she was very excited and said, "This is great." And I said, "Well, okay." But when the choice kind of finally came, and by the time I started at Wharton, I was 37. So I was an assistant professor at a time when someone like Adam Grant was a full professor here. Right. And so I've been at Wharton ever since. And, my teaching vocation really turned out to be my vocation. So all the courses I teach, I've invented. The book that you mentioned comes out of a course I invented that I'm teaching actually this semester. And I started the negotiation courses at Wharton, and I teach a course on responsibility that is kind of a combination of sort of behavioral ethics and legal thought, and so it's I was very lucky. I found the right place. Wharton's turned out to be the perfect place for me. I get to teach undergrads as well as grad students. I have the freedom to invent and express myself. And, at the end of the day, I think most professors teach courses about books they write or articles they write. They do their research, then they teach their courses. And I've done it exactly the opposite. I teach a course until I figured out what I want to say, and then I write a book about the course I teach.
Yeah.
So it seems to have worked out.
It's such an interesting story, and I think a lot of people can relate to this idea of an identity crisis, especially in your 20s and 30s. I mean, yours was, it seems like a little bit more extreme. You were traveling to Afghanistan, and you went to a monastery in Asia as well. And so in those moments, I guess in those lower moments in your journey to Wharton, what was going through your mind? Did you really have any long-term plan, or were you just trying to live day to day, trying to, listen to yourself and figure out what your priorities are?
Yeah, no, much closer to the latter. I at one point on this journey, I actually made a list. I kept some pretty extensive journals to try to keep me anchored in what I was thinking and feeling. And at one point, I wrote a list. I decided at some point along the way, I had this idea that I might want to teach, and so I also thought I was going to be a carpenter. I thought I was going to be a poet. They're all, every day was sort of a different fantasy on what I might want to be. But on the day that I was fantasizing about being a teacher, I wrote down things I could teach, and then on one column, things I could never teach on the other column. Things I could teach: Shakespeare, English literature, history, American history, down the list. And then top of the list, number one on the list of things I could never teach was business. Mm-hmm. So if ever there was an outcome that was completely counterintuitive to any goal that I might have had, it's where things worked out that I ended up. And I think that's actually more common than the reverse. I think there are some people, I know a few people, like Jeremy Siegel is a famous finance professor. Mm-hmm. I know him pretty well at Wharton, and he said he knew he wanted to be an economist from when he was 7. And he was collecting annual reports, from businesses. And so I think there are people that have that clarity early. But I think it's more common to, have a lot of different ideas when you're younger about, you want to be an astronaut or you want to be a whatever. And then as your adult life unfolds, it's a combination of capabilities that you're endowed with, and that's genetic, essentially. I mean, I can write pretty well. I can express myself, and I can't add. I can add. I can't multiply very well, and that's a capability. So this, it's sort of capability meets opportunity and experience. Opportunity and experience elicits and evokes learning down pathways that your capabilities make possible. And then another opportunity presents itself, and then the same process repeats. I actually think it's much more like my parents own this cabin down in southwestern Virginia outside Lexington, and I inherited it. And it's just a 4-bedroom, no bathroom. It's got an outhouse, and it's right on a river in a mountain pass. So the mountains have left many, many rocks in the middle of the river over the centuries, and so you can walk across the river without getting your feet wet if you know where to walk. But when I was a kid, I would make a game of going out, and of course the river's different every day. It depends on what height it is and what you can see, what you can't. And I would try to carve out a new path to get me downriver, a couple hundred yards, again without getting your feet wet, and then get back. And I think life's sort of like that. You take the step that's in front of you, and you find yourself in a position, and you look around and see, okay, well, from this position, what else is possible that will keep me from getting my feet wet? And that's your normal risk aversion. You don't want to dive into something that's going to kill you, and or leave you economically destitute, or whatever your fears are of the worst case scenario. So then from that rock you take a leap to the next one that wasn't too far to jump, but was the best jump available. and then you're in a new spot, and then you look around and see what's the next spot you can jump to. And so it's very situational and opportunistic, as opposed to there's, one true path, one clear purpose, one line, and, you find it and then you stay on it, and then someday, I don't know, whatever the end point is, you get to the end point. As I turned 69 a couple of days ago, and
happy birthday.
Thank you. And but what I've noticed is all these people who've had varying degrees of certainty that I went to school with as a college student or law school or whatever, they get to different stages of their lives, whether it's they lose a spouse or they have to retire or they get laid off or stuff happens. And even if you've got a well-laid plan, it doesn't always work. And so you still have to have this improvisational ability to summon yourself and assess your capabilities and your opportunities and then take a step. I think the most important thing, in my view, is to stay in motion.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the best decision I made, because I was really out of motion when I was in my early 20s, like 23 or 24, when all this began happening to me, I was stuck. I was just sitting in my apartment collecting unemployment and looking at the moonbeams. And, that wasn't going to get me anywhere except in therapy, which I did for a while.
Mm-hmm.
And there's nothing wrong with therapy, but it's still kind of static. You're just sort of talking about stuff that isn't going to change about the past. So I think the best thing that happened to me was that I just got myself in motion and put my body out there to see what might happen. So I was at a talk a couple of years ago. It was the final. They call it Final Friday. It was a panel discussion of faculty that had been sort of elected and nominated and voted on by the MBA class that was graduating, and everybody assembled in the Annenberg Center, which is a big theater on campus, and it was the final weekend before graduation, and each of us was supposed to say something wise, and they got to ask questions. And one of my colleagues said something wise, which I haven't forgotten. It was basically there are many paths to the top of the mountain where your goal might be. So take one.
Yeah. Exactly.
So I think there's something to that. I think you need to just get your ass out of the door and do stuff, even if it's wait on tables or work on an ocean liner or whatever it is. Do it, and then see where you are and see who you meet and see what happens next.
I think there's this analogy in your book where you say, say you're dropped into a completely dark room, you don't know where anything is, you start by feeling where the furniture is, and then from there you take another step, and it seems like it's all about iteration, and like you said, just taking action is the most important thing. And I think what holds maybe some people back, even though they're ambitious, is this fear, either fear of failing, fear of judgment from family or friends, fear of taking a risk. How do you recommend that people get over that hump and really embrace risk to some extent?
Yeah, I think risk tolerance is also genetic. So if there's some people who are just more anxious than others, and for anxious people, taking a little risk causes enormous anxiety. For other people, taking a lot of risk causes hardly any. I'm reading the Ron Chernow's biography of Grant right now, and Grant was one of these people who was only alive when he was taking risks. When his life was before the Civil War, he was selling firewood in Salinas, Illinois, on the street 2 years before the Civil War started. It was complete. Whatever. I wouldn't call him a failure because he was providing for his family, and he was trying to farm and stuff. He'd been drummed out of the military for drinking, but the problem was his life was presenting him no risk, and his personality and his genetic talents thrived on risk, and so he was really stuck. So then the war came, he had a couple good breaks, somebody recommended him to be in it, and then as soon as he got into uniform again and began showing what it was like in a battle, he was completely fearless. Things were flying all around him, and he never batted an eyelash. Everybody else was ducking for cover, and he was running to the top of the hill. So some people are like that. So I wouldn't be too hard on yourself if you are one of the more on the anxious end of the spectrum. So rather than say, well, there's something wrong with me, I tend to get anxious. I think it's more take the risk you can tolerate, because the most important thing is you be able to function. And if you put yourself in a position that is intolerable, you won't function. You won't bring out your best. So take the risk you can tolerate, and then operate within that zone. What happens? There's another process that ensues. It's like the rocks thing. If you do something more, you gain more self-confidence.
Mm-hmm.
And when you gain more self-confidence, the risk perception goes down. So those two things are like, opposites. It doesn't feel like risk if you're self-confident. It feels like risk if you lack confidence.
Yeah, exactly.
And so more experience means you gain more confidence. You reset the bar for whatever it is you're doing to a higher level of risk tolerance, because it doesn't feel like risk anymore. You're capable. You've given a couple public speeches, and now the terror of that is down to some manageable level. So now you can increase the size of the audience from 3 to 6.
Mm-hmm.
So you again, the advice is the same. Take action.
Yeah.
But take action in your zone of effectiveness, and be self-forgiving and compassionate about what that zone is. That's when it helps to have friends who can tell you, like what they think you are and what they think you're capable of, or what might feel to you like anxiety, and they might be able to say, no, it's not so bad, just take a jump. When a lot of students come to me and say, Professor Shell, I'm miserable in banking, or I'm miserable in whatever it is, and I want to do something else, but I'm scared to get out of what I'm doing, and I don't know what to do. And so my advice is usually pretty simple. You just sit down and think about something you'd like to do, just something that, I'd like to work for the San Francisco Giants,
Sure.
whatever your thing is. And then, and this is the part that's eye-opening, I say, go talk to somebody who works for the Giants.
Mm-hmm.
Get an interview with them, or get them to respond to some communication, or get somebody to introduce you to them 2 layers away, or whatever it is, and make it real. Go talk to them, because what you'll find, it doesn't matter what it is that you think is like impossible dream. Somebody's doing it, and the person who's doing it is not really that extraordinary. They're just someone who, just like you said at the beginning of the interview, has had this scrambled set of lines that's led them to this place.
Yeah. Happy
accidents, relationships, luck, and there they are. So once you begin realizing that the people who are doing something you might want to do are just like you, then your confidence goes up a little bit, because you kind of go, well, wow, you don't have to be a genius, do you? In fact, this guy is not easy. I'm actually a little smarter or better or whatever it is than they are. So then you begin thinking, okay, well, what do I need to do to get this process underway? Maybe you have to go to law school, or maybe you have to drop out of law school, or maybe you have to, write an article that's about the entertainment industry and try to get it published on the HuffPost or something. But whatever it is, you'll start taking action, and then you have to that's your shout into the Grand Canyon. You have to wait for the echo.
Yeah.
And then find the echo and keep going.
Yeah, just breaking it down into manageable chunks, really, and going from goal to goal. That definitely seems like it.
I think the big trap is to evaluate yourself through someone else's eyes.
Yeah.
If you're judging yourself, but you're not judging yourself, your brother is judging you, or your mom, or your dad, or your high school classmate, or your rival of some sort from someplace, or some made up alumni association. What is my little picture going to say at the end of the alumni magazine? If you're doing that, then I think that's a false way of thinking. It's not helpful. It's basically what you're doing is you're saying, I want status.
Yes.
And status is always in the eyes of others. You may end up with status, but if you try to get it, it's always a bit of an illusion. Because once you do get it, what you realize is no one's watching.
Yeah.
No one else could care less. And when you go to your reunion and say, I'm a bloppity blop, the people smile and then start talking about themselves.
Yeah. Well,
sort of a waste of time to spend your life trying to impress other people when basically everybody spends most of their life thinking about themselves.
Yeah, exactly. And you talk about this a lot in your third chapter of the book. It's called Society's Answer, Seek Status, Fame, and Fortune. One thing I did want to ask you about that is this problem of social media today. People my age, I guess at any age, you see people being quote-unquote successful on Facebook, Instagram, what have you. And we're constantly comparing ourselves to others that maybe we knew from high school or whatever else. It's so easy to do now. And so how do you recommend ambitious people kind of proceed from there? Do you just ignore it or do something else?
No, that's hard. It's an echo chamber. And there was a thing in the paper this morning that there's a company that sells Twitter followers.
Yeah.
They generated something like 300 million followers for people that are fake. And it's just a business of pretending, of creating the impression that someone has a lot of Twitter followers in order for them to gain status. And it's the same thing happens. People engineer their way onto the bestseller list by seeding a whole bunch of purchases with their own money. And then they get on the bestseller list, and then maybe if someone does buy the book after that. But it's I think it's social media is so pervasive that the only way I've figured out to sort of get away from it is turn it off.
Mm-hmm.
It's unthinkable. I know it's like saying don't have a cell phone or something, but this is maybe generational, but I've never had a Facebook account. I've never looked at Facebook except when someone referred me to Facebook to see that there was an advertised event that, I was going to be in.
Yeah.
I don't have a Twitter account. Life works perfectly well if you don't have any of that. But, one way to handle it is to treat it like junk food. Just say, all right, I'm going to let myself have one bag of Doritos a week. So, okay, I'm going to let myself check my Facebook feed on Saturday morning from 10 to 11. And then spend your time on more productive stuff. That's not just looking to see if you can find your reflection in the narcissistic pool, but actually do something worth someone paying attention to.
Mm-hmm.
So, I think that the modern culture celebrates celebrity. And what is celebrity? Celebrity is famous for what? It's famous for being famous.
Exactly.
That's it. You're not famous for being a singer, not famous for, building a widget, not famous for, writing a book. You're famous for being famous. And if that's what you want to be, if you want to be famous for being famous, there is a career to do it. And Britney Spears figured it out. So, but if you don't want to be famous for being famous, you want to be famous for something else, then, or you don't really, want to get unhooked from being famous at all, I think it's fair that everybody needs respect. Everybody needs some attention. Everybody enjoys self-esteem for doing things. But I think it's more important to do them and then see where the chips fall than it is to be constantly monitoring your averageness to see if it's become extraordinary.
Yeah.
And it's once again, in ice hockey, which is a pretty strange game, but my wife and I follow the Philadelphia Flyers here, and the way you score a goal in ice hockey is really simple. You just keep shooting.
Yeah.
You get in front of the net and you just keep shooting, and they flail away in front of the net, and then eventually luck combined with intention, and the goal gets scored. Every now and then one gets scored on, some extraordinary shot, but that, no team would win more than a game a year if that was the way they limited themselves to shooting. So life is like that. Just keep shooting.
Exactly. And if I can go back a little bit, just to the beginning part of your book, your first chapter, it asks what success is about, or your first couple chapters, and you have this exercise called the 6 Lives exercise, and I remember doing this in your course. It was really revealing, and I believe it's also on your personal website, so I'll link that in the show notes. But can you maybe just talk to the listeners about what it is and why you give your students this exercise?
Yeah, it's the first thing I do in the success class. It's the only thing, or the only thing I'm able to do in a lecture like the one you attended, because they're relatively short. But I've done it with executives, with people at retirement communities, with undergrads, with grad students. Works pretty much across the board, and it is on my website. So on grichardshell.com, there's a link, and it says 6 Lives exercise, and you can do it right there. And I've got about, 20,000 people have done it. So the idea is I wrote 6 little short vignettes. They're like paragraphs that describe 6 different people in 6 different lives that they're leading, and they're all different. And you read the 6 lives, you read the 6 paragraphs. It takes about 6 minutes. And then you rank them from number 1, most successful life, to number 6, least successful life. And the only rule is you can't have a tie. You have to do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And each of the lives has a variety of things going on in it. And what it does is, when you rank them, is it causes you to have to access your values and the balance you're implicitly trying to strike between various aspects of success: happiness, achievement, family, and your rankings really do reflect a bit what those implicit values are. So it's a way of getting your own values out of your unconscious and putting them in front of you, where you can kind of reflect on them and kind of go, that's interesting. Because sometimes people really think that they're chasing one success set of values. They do the little exercise and they realize that their intuitions are running in the opposite direction in terms of what they really value. And so that gives them a little work to do to reconcile what they're actually doing, what their decisions and actions are, with what their genuine values are, and how they can kind of close the gap between those two and start acting in ways that are more congruent with what their actual values are, and kind of recognize where the impulses to do these other things are coming from. And they're almost always coming from somebody else's expectations, some idealized image of what a successful person looks like from your family, your culture, your religious group, whatever it is that's imbued you with these automatic response system triggers. But they're not really what you believe. They're just what you're programmed to do. And so you get a chance, as an adult, you get a chance to sort of rewrite the operating system a little, at least insofar as values is concerned. You don't get to rewrite your genetic capabilities.
Yeah.
But values matter. And I think a lot of what people come to when they start thinking about the word success in a thoughtful way is, what are those values, and how can I start embodying them more in the actual decisions that I make, and the way I evaluate myself, and the respect I seek from people who know me well, not just recognition from people who don't know me at all, and get a little closer to a meaningful life.
Yeah, and I'm so tempted to ask about one of them, but I kind of want people to take it unbiased and just kind of have their own answers and analyze it later.
Yeah, I think that's probably wise for your listeners, that they be able to do it without a lot of priming from us.
Right. And I guess so I'd recommend people check that out. It's on your personal website, like you said. And going back to this idea of values, in the book you also referenced a working class man who visited a Wharton seminar and said that happiness is 3 things. It's health, meaningful work, and love. I guess first, do you agree with that? And do you similar things from most of your students in your courses?
Yeah, one of the challenges in these in the work that I'm doing in this area is to help people define these terms for themselves. Success is a big one. Happiness is probably even a bigger one. People think they use these words and they seem to think they know what they mean, but actually they don't. I mean, when your mom says, "We don't care what you do, we just want you to be happy," and then you kind of press them a little on, well, what do you think? What do you mean by that? What's happiness? And it turns out there's some conditionality to their view of it. That means that means that you're married and you have some children that are our grandchildren, and you're married to someone from our religion or whatever it is that is their version of happiness for you. And I think for an individual, when they think about their own values, they often use these words in a pretty unthinking way. So in the book, I tell the story about a guy I call the Wise Angel. Is a working class guy, actually I think a bricklayer from the campus, who came to a seminar I was attending on happiness. The seminar was about economic well-being and happiness, but he expressed these three legs of a stool as he saw happiness, which was good health, meaningful work, and love. And I think good health is something that you have and sometimes you lose, and I don't think that means that happiness is lost forever if you lose the good health that you had before. Or, meaningful work, something you're doing that really feels like very fulfilling, on Monday can be awful on Friday, either because the economics of whatever it was fell through, or because the boss that you loved left and was replaced by Attila the Hun as a boss. Mm-hmm. Or there are all kinds of things that can happen that can make meaningful work suddenly become less than meaningful. And I don't think that means happiness is lost to you forever. And love is, again, something that's a gift. It's a blessing, but it's not something that you always control. So that comes and goes. So I don't know that those three things are everybody's concept of happiness. It's certainly the case for this guy that he defined it, and I gave him a lot of credit for having summed it up in such a pithy way that, for him at least, he knew that when those three things were in the present, that was about as good as it gets. And I think it's helpful when people realize that they're in a spot where happiness resides, and not always be, restlessly thinking, well, it must be better somewhere else. And that it helps if you identify what the vectors are that, when they intersect, are the happy place. Because that comes and goes. That comes and goes too. We have good days, bad days. Our moods change. Things happen. But it's still the case you can be doing things, making decisions that make it more likely that you'll be moving toward a definition of happiness that you respect and honor, and then celebrate it when it happens to happen. So the challenge is not that there's an answer, and it's a challenge is having the one for you. So in the 6 lives exercise, every single life out of the 6 is number 1 for somebody in a given audience where I make the presentation, and the same life is number 6 for somebody else. And that just tells you, really, the decision is yours. There's not some answer written in invisible ink someplace, and if you use the right infrared light, you'll find the answer, and then everything works after that. The answer is inside yourself, and so you need to look there, and you need to be willing to grow and have that answer change as your life changes. Yeah,
and you recommend people just really sit down, take some time to self-reflect, and that's a way to find happiness. Or are there any tips that you can provide for people that are?
I think it's always about other people.
Yeah.
So sitting down and self-reflecting is like me sitting in my apartment in Washington, D.C., counting the dust motes in the sunbeam. I think you can do a lot of work in your own head and get nowhere. I think journaling is helpful because it at least gets the words out on a page. But I think interacting with other people. You know, have a small group of people. Have a reading group where you read, you know, some books on self-development or spirituality or something that interests all of you, that provokes good questions. You know, find a couple of friends at work that seem to have the same kind of restlessness, and you know, have coffee, talk about it. Get the uncertainties out on the table, because most people think their own uncertainties are like unique, and that everybody else knows exactly what's happening, and they're the outlier. They're the only one in doubt. It's the opposite. There's just a few people who know what they're doing.
Yeah.
And everybody is in doubt. Everybody. They're in doubt about their relationships. They're in doubt about their careers. They're in doubt about their politics, their values, the environment, whatever it is, they're in doubt about it. And once you kind of prick the surface and get behind that, and you share your uncertainties, once again, your confidence can go back up. You know, you don't feel alone. And the one thing that seems to be true about happiness is that, and this is just the social science on happiness, you want to be happy? Spend more time with people you love who love you.
Mm-hmm.
That's it. That's it. That's happy. That doesn't mean you're productive. It doesn't mean that you've found your life's calling, but that's what happiness is. And although it may not be enough all by itself to give you a sense of satisfaction with the few days that we all get on the planet, it's important to know that that's where it always comes back to.
Yeah, of course.
And not sort of destroy the base while you're trying to build some sort of edifice.
Yeah, and you hear about these billionaires or some of the richest people in the world, yet they may be the least happy because they don't have those close relationships with people.
Yeah, and they've destroyed all the relationships that they might have had in their quest to become, you know, the most important, the most well-known, or the wealthiest person on the planet. And, of course, you know, it's very hard to measure who the wealthiest person on the planet is, but I'm guessing that whoever they are, the ones that actually are the wealthiest people on the planet probably didn't plan it that way.
Yeah, right. And if I can ask you to, just we have a couple more minutes here, but just so for people that are listening that are in their 20s or 30s, they're in a white collar job, something like that. They're content with the way things are going, yet they wish things were happening faster. You know, we see, like I said, going back to public influences, we see people that are achieving success, whatever that is, quicker than us. And so they're in their job, they're satisfied, yet they want things to happen quicker. And maybe there's a grass is always greener sort of mentality going on. But what type of advice would you give to those people?
Well, as someone who found their career when they were 37, I can only say that it's better to get it right than to get it quicker.
Yeah.
So, again, I think this is probably a function of social media. I mean, I don't think that if you're a composer, you're a failure because you composed works later than Mozart did, who was doing it when he was 7. You don't have to be a prodigy in order to be able to produce useful things. And I like to say it's not who starts the race, it's who finishes it that wins.
Yeah.
So I think it's more important to focus on what you're doing and how you can do it well and how you can express yourself by doing it, and let the time problem take care of itself. It's, you know, the true, if we're just talking about achievement, you know, put happiness on the side for a second and just look at achievement. Your best achievement, everyone's best achievements are going to come when they hit an activity that combines, you know, 4 or 5 of their innate capabilities in the same activity. And they're firing on all 4 or 5 of those cylinders, doing whatever it is. Well, by the time you find someone who's got the same, you know, put it another way, there's very few people in the planet on the planet who have the same 4 or 5 capabilities as any given person does. It's pretty rare. You can find a lot of people who can write well. You can find a lot of people who can cook well. But there's not as many people who can write about cooking well. And when you add to that presentation skills on top of writing and cooking, and you add to that relationship formation, social networking skills, so now we got 4. A social networker who presents really well, who can write and loves to cook. That's called Julia Childs.
Yeah, right.
And there was only one Julia Childs. And so she found it. She found the spot where all of her capabilities came together in a single celebrity chef career. But it wasn't because she set out to be a celebrity chef. She loved French cooking, and then everything else just kept going. So I think finding one thing you're doing that you love to do, and then the version of that means you get to do 2 things that you do well at the same time, and then the version of that's 3 and 4 and 5. And as the funnel narrows to the 4 or 5 things you're doing all at the same time that you do well, you're going to end up being very, very good at whatever that is. And maybe it's the best tour guide on Disney World. I mean, I think what you have to remove from this calculus is this high enough status for me?
Yes.
You need to get paid. Everybody needs to get paid. So, but you don't have to be paid extraordinarily well. You just have to be paid enough to have financial security. So, you add some constraints. You want respect. You need financial security. You want to make sure that there's a base for a loving family. But the achievement thing, it's really an accumulation of capabilities all pinpointing into a single thing, a single activity. And once you hit that, you don't have to worry about it.
Exactly, and you may not know at this moment what that single thing will be, right?
That's the stepping stones again. That's where you just stay in motion and keep looking for the next opportunity based on what's available.
Exactly, and having the patience to undergo that process too.
Yeah,
it seems like
yeah.
I'm a millennial. Our generation is is not patient, to say the least, and I think that's especially a virtue.
Well, I don't think that you're unique. I think every generation is impatient with itself. Life is short. There's reasons to be impatient. But what I think is different is the echo chamber.
Yes.
Is much more profound for people in an internet-connected world than it was in a paper-connected world or a world where there were sailing vessels that took a month to get across the ocean.
Right. And I'd just like to ask you just one final question here. It's kind of a different one, but you discuss meaningful work in the book. You referenced it a couple minutes ago. And my question is how do you think the rise of technology, even if you think of artificial intelligence, is going to affect the definition of success and meaningful work? Now we hear about jobs that are going to disappear as AI gets better. You first hear about truck drivers, the 2 million truck drivers out there. But then there's the potential to remove even more traditional white-collar jobs, like in financial services, the legal field, whatever it is. So what do you think, or how do you think technology is going to impact this idea of success and meaningful work?
That's a great question. I don't, it's really hard to know. One thing I think is true over generations of capitalism is that it's creative destruction. So every time you eliminate a category of work, you create another category. And so the people doing the programming for AI are going to have opportunities that they didn't have before AI became possible. And people who drive trucks, I know a few of them who think that it's meaningful, but I know a couple more who don't.
Yeah.
So some of the jobs that are going to get eliminated are going to be jobs that are pretty drudge-type jobs, and people in them aren't really happy. They're just doing it because they have to earn a living. And it's always hard if you take someone who's, a senior person in that category, and the disruption happens at a very bad time for them. So they lose their job as a ship worker or as a blacksmith or whatever it is, just as tanker vessels and carriages go out of business, and it's hard. There's no that's General Grant. You're selling firewood on the street, but but I think for the knowledge worker, the younger person who's got skills, it's really sort of pivoting. So as things shift over, time to get new knowledge, time to retool, time to take the capabilities you have, which are not skills. Capabilities are different than skills. Skill is I can code in language X. Capability is I can code. Mm-hmm. And when language X goes out of business, you take your capability and learn language Y. If you're good at public communication, or you're good at social networking, or whatever it is you're good at, you just have to pick yourself up and shift as the current shifts toward where the work is, and use your capabilities, retool, reorient, rechannel, and it's challenging, it's hard, but that's what you have to do. So technology, again, the pace and scale of it is different. Technology itself has been part of the story since before the pharaohs. So I think it's the resiliency that people have, and that self-confidence thing we talked about earlier, comes from staying in motion. Yep.
Yeah, taking action and honing in on your capabilities. I love it.
Yep, exactly.
And so to wrap up, there's a question I like to ask guests. Our listeners can kind of learn something a little more personal about you. So say hypothetically you're going to Mars or a deserted island, and you can only bring a book, a movie, and an album, a CD album. What do you bring?
A book, a movie, and a CD. CD. There are no CDs.
Yeah, an album.
Music. Yeah. Okay, the book. I bring the Bible. Mm-hmm. Endless source of poetry, inspiration, stories, culture, history. I've read a lot of books, but I have that one. I'm not necessarily a religious person, but I have that book next to my bed and dip into it. And I can only have one. That's the one. If I had the collected works of Shakespeare, I'd probably, have a plan B on that one.
Yeah.
But the Bible, movie, whoa. There are a lot of those. I don't know that there's any movie I'd want to see more than about 10 times. And the desert island might be a pretty hard place to get patient with that. When you said the question, one of my favorite movies is Local Hero, which is a kind of mythic story of this business guy who goes to an island or a coastal town in Scotland and has to buy some land for a tycoon, and then they end up, being mesmerized by the skies, and a mermaid shows up, and so I'm kind of a fable kind of guy. So the Shape of Water, I just saw that over the weekend. That's another mythic story, another fable. So I would bring, The Princess Bride, maybe. I would bring mythic movies.
Right.
I would just have to pick one, and then music. Well, I met my wife at a Grateful Dead concert when I was in college, so I guess I would bring the greatest hits album of the Grateful Dead.
That's outstanding. This is a great story. And so if listeners want to learn more about you, they can go to your personal website, right?
Yeah, grichardshell.com, all one word.
Very good. Well, Professor Schell, thank you so much for appearing on my podcast. I greatly appreciate it, and wish you the best of luck this year at Wharton.
Thank you, Adam, and best of luck to you, too.
All right, thank you.
I appreciate your having me on. Yep. All right, see ya.
Once again, I'd like to thank Professor G. Richard Schell for appearing on the podcast this week. His book Springboard absolutely inspires me when I feel a sense of uncertainty toward my career, and I think that it can help you if you feel stuck. If you're interested in learning more, you can read a preview of the book on Amazon. In addition to checking out the book, you can see Professor Schell's 6 Lives exercise on his website, which is in the show notes. Thanks for tuning in to this episode of The Power of Bold. You can view our show notes by visiting thepowerofbold.com, And feel free to also get in touch with us on Twitter and Facebook. Finally, we'd greatly appreciate if you can leave us a review on iTunes, so many thanks for doing so. Until next time, take care.